Hello and welcome to the CYF course. For this session, we will speak about the way to teach to children, the learning style, and what we need to be aware of if we really want to train the next generation. So, first let's look at the way Jesus was teaching. There is something that is very interesting about the way he was teaching, because people were hooked. He was using a lot of parables or stories of daily life. He was watching someone sowing in the fields and, oh, this is an opportunity to teach. And Jesus was linking his teaching with the things around him. But what is very interesting about Jesus, that it is said about him in Matthew 7 verse 29, because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. They listened to him because Jesus taught with authority. So how do you teach with authority? Teaching is something, but some people, they teach with no authority, and it's boring at best. So teaching is a very important ministry in the body. And James told us in chapter 3 verse 1, "Not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly." We had a responsibility. We cannot say anything. We need to prepare ourselves. And following the example of Jesus, we need to learn to teach with authority. So authority, how do you measure authority? So let's take an example. Think about all the hundreds, maybe thousands of sermons or teaching that you heard during your Christian life. Which one do you remember? Sometimes we don't even remember the sermon of 2 Sundays ago, but sometimes we remember one memorable sermon maybe 10 years ago. Why do we remember some of the sermons and not others? This is where the authority is. I remember some teachings very vividly in my memory because I was very touched. And what gives authority to our messages? And I can think about at least 4 things. The first one is experience. I teach only on the things that I really experienced, not just about head knowledge, but the things that are part of my building up, the way that the Lord has trained me. I had some experience. Let's say my conversion was spectacular, so I can teach about conversion. Let's say that I experienced the baptism of the Holy Spirit. I can teach about that because I can share from my personal experience. Not saying that everybody should have the same experience. It can happen so many different ways, but my personal experience gives me authority. Then passion. You can tell the difference. I can tell in my kids, sometimes they come back from school. How was geography this morning? So boring. But some kids had some excellent teacher in history and they started to love history. And sometimes it's not because they have a passion for history, it's just because passion is contagious. If the teacher is passionate about what he teaches, the passion will ignite the heart of the children too. So your passion will give you authority. Illustration. As I said before, Jesus took illustration from daily life all the time. We spoke about object lessons. And this illustration helps the children and the adults, to be honest, to memorize and to remember the lesson that we want to pass on. So how can we illustrate what we share in a way that will impact our audience? And the last thing is meditation and revelation. When you take time to meditate on a specific passage of the scriptures, and God gives you revelation on this passage, and you bring that when you share, people can see that, oh, this is not shallow, this is deep, there is substance, there is something that the teacher has really experienced and received from God. So if you just read some lessons in a book, you don't teach with authority. You need to take the matter yourself, the material, and digest it, and feed yourself, and meditate on it, and ask God to bring revelation through it. And when you share, that will be something that will impact. So remember, not many of you should become teachers. Don't try to become a cheap teacher. Just reading something in the manual and parroting it on Sunday morning. It needs to be something that inhabits your heart, that overflows from you. And this comes when you spend time with God, and that you build on your own experience and revelation, that you bring passion and illustration. Then you will teach with authority. How do you bring a teaching? How do you prepare a teaching first to children? The typical message outline is an introduction, a content, a conclusion, and an application, something we should not forget. First, don't be too long. Stop when your audience is still thirsty. If when you stop teaching, everybody say, finally, you've been too long. If when you stop teaching, everybody say, oh no, not already, give us more, that's good. Stop when your audience is still thirsty. This is so important. Then, what outcome do you want? Start with the end in mind. What do you want the children to learn, or to be able to practice, to experience at the end, or to know? This is so important. And you need to aim for one clear outcome. Have one clear objective for what you want to achieve at the end. This is so important. So don't rush in all the direction and disperse yourself, spreading in many different directions, chasing too many rabbits and catching no one finally. So you need to be very targeting one outcome. Then be practical. It should not be about just, ideas. Children are practical. They don't have the abstract thinking yet before 10, 11, 12 years old. So you need to be very concrete, and they need to be able to apply what you've been teaching. You need to vary your approach of the biblical text. You don't have to read it every time. You can quote it, you can play it. You can play it with puppets, or you can draw it. There are so many ways to share a biblical text. We will speak about that in another session. Find the hook. The first 2 minutes of your sharing will determine if the children will follow you to the end. If you lose them from the beginning, you've lost them for the whole time. So think about a way to hook them, an object, a question, an activity that will catch their attention, and after that you can build on that. Include testimonies. Include also biblical reference. You can include stories or quotes with the older children. Look for visual ideas like object lessons or illustrations from movies or cartoons. Ask them questions. When you ask a question, you just make them think and make them being active in your teaching and not just passive. And plan an application. This is so important. How will you finish? How do you want them to respond to the Lord? And not to let the word of the Lord fall on the ground, but doing something with what God has told them. This is so important. Now you need also to realize that not all children and adults, they learn the same way. There are different learning styles. And I love one teacher whose name is Marlene Lefevre, and she has explained that there are 4 kinds of ways to learn. The first learners are the imaginatives. The imaginatives, they need to talk. They need to express themselves. They cannot just listen to someone. They need to exchange about the topic, they need to give their ideas, their opinions, they need to be involved. And the imaginative, they will bring all their imagination into that. They are very often artistic, and this is a way to learn. Then there is the analytic children. The analytic are those who can follow someone speaking from the front, and they will be interested, especially if it is well structured, and they can take notes, point 1, point 2, point 3, and they learn by listening. Then there is the common sense children, and the common sense, they are very practical. If they cannot put that into action, it doesn't serve anything. So they need to put in practice, and it is during the practice that they learn. It's not during the talking, it's not during the listening, but it is during the practicing. So how can you do something with what you've been teaching? This is the way these children will integrate in their heart what they've been listening to. And then there is the dynamic ones. There are only a few percentage. The other ones may be 30% of imaginatives, 30% of analytics, 30% of common sense, only 10% of dynamics. The dynamics, when you say something this way, they always think, how could we do it another way, a different way? It's not because they are rebellious, it's because they are thinking creatively. Their mind is wired to create new ways of doing things. So they find new applications, new explanations, new interpretations. And of course, in the beginning, maybe not a lot of those will work, but we need people like that because they will help us to renew our ministry along the way. So it helps us to structure a lesson. In a lesson, we need a time to talk, and we reach the analytics. We need a time to share together in groups, and we reach the imaginatives. We need a time to put in practice, and we reach the common sense people. And we need a time to imagine, to create, to open every doors to do things differently. And so the dynamic will raise up and give their best here. So we need to be aware of all these learning styles. Not every children learn the same. And we tend to teach the way we learn. It's like the language of love. And we need to be aware of that, so we make sure that we do not let on the fringe some of the children because they do not correspond to who we are. One good thing is also to have different teachers that teach with different strengths. So the children are exposed to different ways of teaching, and we reach more of these learning styles. This is so different, so important. Something that we have to keep in mind is the learning pyramid. Look at that. We remember 10% of what we read. We remember 20% of what we hear. We remember 30% of what we see. We remember 50% of what we hear and see. We remember 70% of what we say. And we remember 90% of what we say and do. So it's important. If we want really to train our children and for them to grow, we don't want to fool ourselves just because we've spoken to them so many times. What do they really remember? And it's not just about remembering, but it's about integrating in your life. So when your children or teenagers start to be able to teach themselves what you have taught them, they integrate it even more. So when do they have this opportunity to teach? The younger ones, maybe? It's part of their training to be able to teach and to practice what they have been receiving. So remember this learning pyramid. It helps us also to evaluate the efficiency of our discipleship methods. Another thing that I wanted to share before the end is what we call the Bloom taxonomy. It's built on 6 different verbs who showed us the next level of training. Remember is the first level. In many nations, the school is always built on this aspect of learning by heart, remembering. That's okay. But it's not good for every children. Some children cannot do that. They don't have a good memory. And it's not because you remember something and you can quote many Bible verses that you are a disciple. A disciple is not a parrot. A disciple is about all of life. The second level is to understand. Remembering is one thing, understanding is the next thing, applying is the third thing, being able to put that in practice. Analyzing is the next thing, is breaking down information into component parts, is being able to process, to meditate, to have an opinion. And that brings us to the next step, that is evaluating. That means judging the value of the information or the idea. And the last thing is creating. And we want our children to become, as much as possible, creators, and to bring them through these different stages of learning. This is what we call Bloom's taxonomy, from the name of the one who thought about that. And that could be a good tool also to help us develop our training methodology and strategy to become more and more efficient. We'll put now some questions to make you think about that and to help you evaluate and assess the way you are doing discipleship at this stage. And maybe the Lord is challenging you to go to the next level. Maybe the Lord is challenging you to have more authority in the way you teach. May the Lord lead you into this question as you share and pray for one another, and to become even more efficient disciples for the next generation. God bless you.